Hi, I'm Hershey Felder on the stage of the Royal George Theatre, and you're watching Taped with Rabbi Doug.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight. But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Mondays but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're going to see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. My guest today here in Los Angeles, California on location is Julie Kohner. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
And Julie runs a show called Voices of the Generations, and it's based on the book called Hannah and Walter, a love story about her parents, Hannah and Walter Kohner. And I just want to, first of all, of course, welcome you to the show and ask you, tell me about what is Voices of the Generations. What is your message that you share with the community when you talk about Voices of the Generations?
Well, Voices of the Generations is a program that began shortly after my mother's death about 13 years ago. A very good friend and colleague who was an educational director at one of the congregations here in Los Angeles and who knew my family approached me and said, you need to continue your mother's story, her legacy. And so I started teaching Holocaust studies based on my parents' book back in 1990, and I had an opportunity to share that with 7th graders and then with congregations. And now, as I've mentioned to you, I travel throughout the country with Voices of the Generations, sharing my parents' story and some videotape that my mother had been on, actually in the early 50s on the television show.
Well, tell me a little bit about what makes your parents' story unique to so many others who survived the Holocaust. Not everyone has their children going around talking about them and lecturing. What is unique about your parents' story?
Well, I think, of course, all survivors' stories are so incredible and so unique. And I encourage all children of survivors and survivors themselves to share as much as they possibly can about this tragic period of time. I think one of the areas that makes my parents' story rather unique is the fact that my mother was on a television show back in 1953 called This Is Your Life. And she was actually the first non-celebrity Holocaust survivor whose life story was done on that show.
And for those of you who are familiar and not familiar, This Is Your Life was a very famous TV show in the 1950s, a black and white TV show, which I believe went off the air in the early 60s, am I right?
Actually, it was late 60s. Yeah.
Late 60s. And I remember it vaguely as a child. And you actually have the whole history from the TV show in the script right here in this book. Tell me a little bit about what they did on This Is Your Life for your mother.
Well, my mother, of course, had no clue that she was going to be on the show. My father was an established theatrical agent here in Los Angeles, and one of his clients, Jeffrey Hunter, was going to be in the audience, and my father told my mother that you're going to sit next to him, and Ralph Edwards is going to come up with this book, and you're going to help Ralph Edwards present This Is Your Life, Jeffrey Hunter, to him. But of course, the whole time, everybody knew, including Jeffrey Hunter, that it was going to be a very special night because it was going to be not a celebrity, but my mother's story that was going to be told. And of course, she was in complete shock. She came up on stage, and as the show goes, the life story of that person unfolds. And in this case, initially they brought back a childhood friend, and then a woman who she was in 4 camps with who had survived.
Childhood friend who was also a survivor.
Actually, childhood friend, just somebody who she grew up with. But the woman who she had been in 4 camps with now lives here in Los Angeles. And so she was one of the guests. The next person was Sergeant Schuchart, who was one of the American soldiers who liberated my mom's camp.
And which camp was that she was liberated from?
Mauthausen, on May 5th. 1945. And of course, they hadn't seen each other since then. So.
And did they have a relationship at the time that the camp was liberated?
No, not much of a relationship, except for the fact that...
Your mother knew who he was at the time? Being one of the liberators?
Oh, well, yes, being a liberator. And actually, he was kind enough to ask my mother if there was anybody that perhaps she would like him to notify. And so she said, well, yes, perhaps my old fiancé would like to know that I had survived. And so she gave a note to him, and when he asked for the address, she said, well, his name is Walter Kohner, and he lives on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. And he asked for the address, but unfortunately she couldn't recall. So for those of people that aren't familiar with Sunset Boulevard, it's 21 miles long, and yet that letter did get to my father.
And I just spent the day driving about 20 of those 21 miles. We took a cruise down Sunset Boulevard today, all the way to the ocean, and had a wonderful time. It's a beautiful road. Now, so your father, who was her fiancé at the time, had already, before the war, come to America and was living in Los Angeles?
Yes, he was. He was very fortunate because he received an affidavit through his brother who was already living in America in Los Angeles. He was able to come. And once he was here, he told my mother, I will do my best to try and get you an affidavit so you can come. So he had suggested, my parents were from Czechoslovakia, that my mother leave their hometown of Teplitz-Schernau, which was just 8 miles from the German border, and go to Holland. And so she got a job working as a maid for some relatives. And he was going to send her papers at the American consulate in Rotterdam. Unfortunately, those papers never came. And of course, the war progressed, and she was there, and he was here.
And your father had no idea the outcome of where your mother was at the time, or if she was alive,
correct,
or what was going on with her during this whole time.
The first contact or information that he had gotten was that she was liberated by an American soldier,
Sergeant
Schuchart.
Sergeant Schuchart actually followed through and did make this contact for your mother.
Yes.
Amazing.
The Postal Service in America, particularly in Los Angeles, I think, really cared to connect people from Europe to America and connect the people. And so my father was actually stationed in Luxembourg. He was in the Army, and he was working at Radio Luxembourg transmitting the news. And he received an envelope, and in that envelope was another envelope that had been addressed. In fact, the envelope is in the book. And that says, hold for Mr. Walter Kohner, Sunset Boulevard, with a question mark. And it got to him.
Wow.
So it was pretty amazing.
An amazing story. And all these tales of your parents' life are in their book, Hannah and Walter, which is not for sale on the market, but you do have copies if people are interested.
Yes.
So anybody who might be interested in finding about Hannah and Walter, do email us here at taped@emailchicago.com, and I'll put you in touch with Julie. So tell me more, Julie. Your parents were in touch after this point. How did they finally end up getting together?
My father, when he received this letter, of course there was no return address, and the APO number was smudged, so he really didn't know where she was. So he asked his company commander if he could have a jeep and start searching through Europe to find her. And he said, of course. And so he decided the first place he would go would be his hometown of Teplitz-Schernau in Sudetenland. Virtually no one returned, Jews, in terms of coming back after the war. So he decided he would go to Prague, to the capital, and thought that perhaps there would be some whereabouts lists of repatriation centers to see if, in fact, her name was on the list. There was nothing there that he could find, and so as he was walking back to his jeep, trying to figure out where he would go next, there was a man who was looking at him, and he looked back, and amazingly, it was Hannah's brother, who was the only other survivor of the family. And he had gone to Prague to find her, to see if she was still alive. Well, he didn't know if she had survived Auschwitz, because of course so many millions of people did not. And what ended up happening was Walter gave him that good news that in fact she had survived. Backing up a little bit in the story, that we hadn't talked about it yet at this point, is the fact that Walter received a letter from Hannah while she was living in Amsterdam, waiting for papers from him, and realizing that that was not going to happen. Her quota number was 5 years down the road, that she had met and fell in love with someone else, and she married him. And unfortunately, 6 weeks after she and Carl Benjamin had been married, they were sent to the first of 4 camps. And by the time they got to Auschwitz, Carl had been killed. Now, Walter didn't know for sure that that had happened, and Friedel had found out, her brother, that he had been killed. And so my uncle, my mom's brother, Friedel, told Walter that Carl had been killed, and probably Hannah had gone back to see if any of Carl's family had still survived, so maybe look for her in Holland. So he went to Holland, went to repatriation centers, found her name on the list, went to where she was staying, knocked on the door, and there she was. So it truly was a love story.
Wow. So your mother knew that her first husband was killed. And her next move at the liberation of the camp was to search out her ex-fiancé, who she lost touch with. Mm-hmm. Amazing story. An amazing story. You obviously, in your travels and your speaking engagements, speak of your parents' story. What is your message in doing that? What is your, outside of the personal sharing of your parents' story, what is your message to the community, to the Jewish community, to the world community, about your parents' story and about Voices of the Generations?
Well, I think there are a number of messages. First of all, when I go to speak to synagogues and to day schools, religious day schools, Jewish community centers, it's truly speaking to family, because of course we all know what happened, and we have all had someone touch our lives that has been from the past. And it's truly, at that point, just sharing another person's experience and the uniqueness of the fact that my mother had been on the television show, and I bring artifacts with me from that period of time as well. I've had a wonderful opportunity to go to a number of Catholic schools in Los Angeles, and private schools. And it's quite amazing to find out how little it is taught to our junior high and high school students. And I feel that the first thing I do is ask them, tell me one fact that you know about the Holocaust. And maybe I see 2 hands go up. And they say, well, there was a man named Hitler who hated Jews, and they put them in concentration camps, and there were a couple million that were killed. And that's about the extent of it. So I feel that if I can make some sort of an impression on their lives as to, and enlighten them as to what happened during this period of time, then my work is definitely worthwhile doing.
Wonderful. My guest today is Julie Kohner of Voices of Generations, and we're here at Taped with Rabbi Doug. Stay with us, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Baby, you can drive my car.
Hi, I'm Judd Nelson for RAD, recording artists, actors, and athletes against drunk driving.
Baby, you can drive my car.
Your lifestyle is your business. But when you drive drunk, you become everyone's business. Be responsible. Choose a designated driver. Please, don't drink and drive.
Beep, 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 yeah!
Maria?
Yeah?
Some things on TV scare Elmo.
If some things on TV make you or you feel sad or scared, tell a grown-up that's close to you.
Like you, Maria.
Yes, like me.
I'm sick of dealing with you.
I work 6 days a week. Who do you think you are?
Don't you ever talk back!
What a child learns about violence, a child learns for life. Teach carefully. We can show you how.
I'm Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary, sometimes known as Puff the Magic Dragon, and I'm hiding the great face of Rabbi Doug. Watch it. Rabbi Doug. It's a wonderful show.
Welcome back to Taped with Rabbi Doug. I'm here with Julie Kohner of Voices of the Generations, and we're here on location in Los Angeles, California, where Julie lives and speaks about Voices of the Generations, which is not only the story of her parents, Hannah and Walter Kohner, their love story, and their surviving the Holocaust, but she teaches about the Holocaust and the profound message that it leaves to us in this generation and for future generations. And Julie, tell me a little bit about you yourself. Your parents obviously were involved in writing this book, I understand, with an uncle of yours, Frederick Kohner. How did you become involved in speaking and being asked to speak all over the country?
Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Judy Aronson, who's a very dear friend and colleague, she was the educational director at a congregation, asked me after my parents' death to start teaching Holocaust studies. And I said, I'd love to do that, but how are we going to go about doing this? And she said, I have a great idea. And she was one for trying anything. She said, let's teach utilizing your parents' story. Now, the book was out of print at that time, so we were Xeroxing pages of it and putting them in binders for the students to read. We would read chapter by chapter out loud in the class, and then I would bring artifacts in that I would kind of unearth as I was going through boxes after my parents' death, and add that to the program. And then as a culmination, we would show that this is your life video. Invite parents, grandparents, whoever was interested with the students to see. And from there, it blossomed into doing it for congregations as an entirety on Friday night for Shabbos, or on a Sunday morning for the entire educational department. And people found it to be really very inspirational. And rabbis or educators would say, you should really call my good friend so-and-so in Chicago, in New York, wherever, throughout the country, and see if he's interested. I think he would be, or she would be, to have you come and speak. I don't have a publicist. This is strictly something I do. I pick up phones on referrals and make the contacts, and people are very, very kind and invite me to come and speak and share this story with their congregations and with their students.
How long have you actually been doing this?
About 12 and a half years.
12 and a half years.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how you named your speech, your presentation, Voices of the Generations.
Actually, Judy and I came up with the name together. I just felt that Voices of the Generations was appropriate looking back to the generation that is no longer. And in this case, of course, it's our people who had survived the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm. I see you have had some press here in Los Angeles.
Yes.
You were in the living section of the Los Angeles Times. Unforgettable. Julie Kohner is flanked by photos of her parents, Walter and Hannah Kohner, whose stories she tells around the country in a program called Voices of the Generations. Who approached you about that, and how did they find out about you?
Actually, I approached someone who had done a front page story of Southern California Living Section about a Hispanic woman who was sitting, in this photo, was sitting in front of her class, and I read the article, and she was basically talking about what it was like to grow up as a child of Hispanic relatives, as a first-generation American. And this was at the kitchen table, and I said to my husband, you know what? I should call the gentleman who wrote this article and see if he's interested in doing something about Voices of the Generations and what I do. And he said, sure, you have nothing to lose. And so I picked up the phone and made a phone call, reached him, sent him the book. And a couple weeks later, he and a photographer were at my house and doing a story.
Wonderful.
It was really amazing.
Well, tell me, you're married, and how many children do you have?
I have one son, Danny.
How old is he?
And he's 11.
He's 11 right now.
Yes.
Very nice. And so you do all this traveling. How do your husband and Danny deal with that when Mom is off on the road?
Well, I try and book as many engagements in California as possible, particularly Southern California. But my really heavy times of travel are during Kristallnacht in November and during Yom HaShoah, which is end of April, beginning of May usually. Sometimes I take them with me. In fact, I did a program for Kristallnacht in St. Louis about 3 years ago, and this was really a wonderful experience. One of the rabbis of the congregation asked me to come and speak for Kristallnacht.
Let me just explain for those viewers who don't know. Kristallnacht is the night of the broken glass,
Yes.
the night where the pogrom came through and destroyed so many synagogues, burnt so many Jewish businesses, broke the windows at Jewish businesses. So I think that it should be clear if you don't know what Kristallnacht
Yes, I'm
is.
sorry, most definitely. And I suddenly one day, as I was getting ready to plan my itinerary from place to place, and realized, of course, I was going to St. Louis, in my mind I was playing the This Is Your Life tape, which I've heard probably over 200 times. And there's a part where my mother says, "And you came from St. Louis to Sergeant Schuchart." And I suddenly went, oh my gosh, I should see if this man is still alive. So I made some calls, I made some connections. No one seemed to know who he was. And then all of a sudden, a couple days later, I get a phone call late at night saying, "Is this Julie?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Hi, this is Jay Schuchart. Harold was my father." And it was the son of the man who liberated my mom's camp.
He was no longer alive.
And he was no longer alive, as my mother, of course, was not either. And he said, "But I've been looking for you for 10 years. And I said, "You're kidding. Why?" He said, "I was 7 years old when my parents left for Hollywood from St. Louis to be on the
This
show.
Is Your Life.
And I've always wanted a copy of the show. I've always wanted to see what happened." And I said, "Well, not only will you have a copy, but I'll get to give it to you because I'm coming to St. Louis." Well, the rabbi there was so kind. He set up a huge dinner before for me, and I brought my son and my husband, and his whole family, his children. His sister came from Chicago. And it was a reunion of what was like family. Here, there were two second generations, one of a Holocaust survivor, and the other, of course, of the man who liberated my mom's camp. And actually, CBS News came to film that, and we were on the news. And it was just wonderful. We've been in touch ever since. And so that was one of my wonderful trips, my special trips that I took. My husband and my son.
Great. Going back to This Is Your Life, and such an amazing thing to be featured on this national television show for your mother. How did they find out about your mother, and did your father make the arrangements?
Yes.
Who's the one that set it all up?
Actually, my father did. Being that he was a theatrical agent, he had a client who was Ralph Edwards, who was the host of This Is Your Life. And my father said to him, I know that you primarily do actors, actresses, entertainment people. However, I'd like to share with you Hannah's story. I think you'll find it really very, very unique. And so they probably sat down over a lunch or what have you, and my father was a very convincing man and said, "Maybe you'd like to do a show like this." And they went straight to Hazel Bishop, who was the sponsor, and Ralph said, "You have to do this." And lo and behold, she was the one who broke the mold. And after that, there were a number of rabbis who were survivors and cantors who came on the show after that. But she was the first.
So I presume that because this is so close to your heart and you don't have any personal gain in doing it, it's for the message that you're sending, that you plan on going on and doing this for a lot longer?
I hope so.
Very nice. Very nice. Do you have any special upcoming engagements in the next year that would be in any cities or any special events that would be most notable for our audience? Are you going to be back in Chicago in the next year? I know you were just there this year.
I was just there again in November for Kristallnacht. I did three speaking engagements, and actually Jay's sister Mickey, the one who came to St. Louis, came to the Friday night service at BJBE, and I got to introduce her to everybody. So that was very special. I'm going to Atlanta in January, San Francisco, and then I'm going for Yom HaShoah to the south. I'm going to be in Savannah, Georgia, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Charleston, South Carolina.
You do a lot of traveling.
Yeah.
Have you ever been on TV before? Have you ever done a TV show yourself?
Well, like news shows.
Wonderful. Well, I think this is most amazing. If we looked in your parents' book, and obviously a lot of it is in your parents' words and their story, what would you say is the most unique experience that the two of them shared that was close to their hearts, that we haven't talked about already?
Right. I think that how incredibly in love they were, and they were not going to let 7 to 10 years of horrible history separate them permanently. My mother attributes her survival a great deal towards luck, being at the right places at the right time. I mean, having survived 4 camps, including Auschwitz, and being liberated at a reasonably decent health and surviving. So many didn't. And being able to be reunited with her first true love.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I think the story is amazing, and I think you should go on with This Is Your Life. Julie Kohner sharing the life of your parents and the message to the worldwide community of how important it is to remember the Holocaust, to remember the message that we have today to remember. And I hope that Voices of the Generations go on for generation after generation. Thanks for being on the show, Julie Kohner.
Thank you.
Of Voices of the Generations. Thank you all for being with us. Remember, we're on every week at this time, so stay with us every week. We hope to see you next time here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom.
Zijn of ewig begetonen. Hij wil meer zijn of ewig begetonen. Ik heb eigen weg, mijn dochter van een schnoer. Ze zal bij echt niet onder in de sporen. Ik heb eigen weg, mijn dochter van een schnoer. Ze zal bij echt niet onder in de sporen. Meteen is de mijne, meteen is de getreide. Mijn dochter zult in der vriend werken. Mein Kind zult in der vriend werken. Und Tomer wetter sein, ein Auto auf mein Kind. Wie eine eigene Mama sollt das verdecken. Tomer wetter sein, ein Auto auf mein Kind. Wie eine eigene Mama sollt das verdecken. Meteen is de getreie, ach, onder van tut me bloed.